Welcome back to Kingdom Tales. I'm Father Lee, and together we're reading through The Tales of the Resistance by David and Karen Maines. When I was younger, I had a quiet, secret place in my room where I could go if I felt uncomfortable or if I felt overwhelmed. It was a place where I kept small things that made me feel happy, books, things to write with, things to read, things to see and do. And when I went into that quiet place, I felt secure. And if things around me felt like they were overwhelming, it was a place where I felt like I was in control. Where do you go when you're feeling overwhelmed or afraid? Do you have a secret place of your own that you can go? Do you have somebody that you can call and talk to about it? Are you able to go and see someone? Do you go and give someone a hug? Do you climb up into your parents' arms? Where do you go when you feel overwhelmed? That's the question at the heart of our story today. And the answer to that question is that even when we are overwhelmed, even when we're in our most secret place, we're never alone, because our King Jesus is with us all the time. This is the Carnival Daughter. If the enchanter looked into the eyes of a child, his gaze could burn a scar on the soul. Some children became ill and malformed at his evil glance and were outcast from Enchanted City. These were the lucky ones. Others went away forever into a country that was only in their minds. Carney lived in a huge mansion on the edge of the mountain that rose behind Enchanted City. Mount Hill lifted its grand peak to the sky and proudly displayed a vast array of large estates and palatial homes. The child's father was a wealthy merchant who traveled far to purchase costly goods for sale in the city bazaar. Carney had everything a girl could want. She never went hungry or shivered in the cold. Her father was rich enough to hire servants. Her mother was beautiful and kind. She had no brothers or sisters demanding to share her toys, but something was wrong. Something was so wrong with Carney that her mother wept quietly in the day while everyone else was sleeping. Her father walked around with a worried frown, creasing deep lines between his eyes. The servants huddled in groups, discussing the girl's sorry condition. Carney stayed in her room. She refused to look out her windows at the lovely starry nights. The shutters were locked, the blinds were shut, the heavy winter tapestries were always drawn. The only persons allowed in the room were Nurse, who left carrying silver trays of half-eaten food, and Carney's mother, who stayed only for short visits. But never her father. He, unfortunately, reminded his daughter of the enchanter. All the old-time servants remembered that the girl had once been happy, beautiful, like a little pixie with sparkling brown eyes and lustrous curly black hair. Her cheeks dimpled when she smiled, and she was always smiling, dancing about, full of embraces for everyone. "She's a love," they'd whisper to one another, their starched headpieces bobbing in a tight circle. "Such a love, so sad." But 5 years ago, it happened. The Enchanter's Ball, held yearly at a mansion of the wizard's own choosing, took place that year at the marble cedar palace of Carney's father. The house had been filled with fire priests, and the evil enchanter's minions stood guard all round the revelers who laughed and danced and acted as though they were having a good time, although some admitted it was hard to have fun on command. That night, Carney was safely tucked in bed. Mothers hid their children out of sight when the enchanter was nearby, not because the enchanter didn't like children. No, the problem was that he liked them too much and in all the wrong ways. Orphans, of course, belonged to the enchanter. They became his forced labor to do the dirty work of Enchanted City, but children of the wealthy were not beyond his conscription. Many a beautiful child had been drafted to serve as a pampered attendant in the Dakota. Few parents considered this a privilege. Downstairs the music played. Bells sewn to the hems of fire priests' robes jangled. Laughter and merriment called the little child from her deep sleep. She crept from bed and tiptoed into the circular railing that guarded the bedroom corridor from the vast space that arched to the great ceiling above and to the grand ballroom below. She would find her mother, she thought. Thumb in her mouth, dressed in snug pajamas, she descended the stairs step by step, her hand gripping the banister. No one noticed her, not the laughing adults, not the servants hurrying by with drinks and aperitifs, but her little eyes caught sight of the tallest man in the hall. She stopped 1 foot in midair and stared. He was wearing the most beautiful robe. It flashed as he turned and shimmered as he swayed. His amber hair was brilliant and soft. It was the enchanter, at his most attractive, in rare party form. Suddenly, he turned where he was standing as though he felt her eyes on him. The man fixed his look on her, capturing her eyes with his own. It was too late to look away. Too late. Too late. She was a beautiful child. He waved his hands in the air, casting an enchantment. Sparks flew from his fingertips, and though the music played on, everyone in the room stood stone still. The man left the party and walked across the room to the grand staircase and the child. He climbed each step slowly, one at a time, his gaze burning with intensity. Mesmerized as she was, child though she was, she sensed danger. She backed up a stair, her thumb still in her mouth. His look was hot, and she was afraid. He looked at her a long time, and she felt his stare pierce to her very soul. "Mama!" she finally cried, and the spell was broken. People finished the laugh that had been interrupted, and the thought in mid-sentence, and the incomplete dance step. Though the music played, and the room suddenly filled with merriment again, her beautiful mother came running, her long silken dress rustling. She lifted her daughter into her arms. "What are you doing out of bed?" The enchanter spoke. "You have a very lovely child there." Carney could feel her mother shiver. Carney was taken back to her room and tucked into her feather-quilted bed, but when she woke in the morning, she couldn't bear for anyone to look at her or to look into her eyes. So the curtains were drawn because she was afraid someone was peering in at her. The doctors her father called frightened her more, and when they looked at her, she slipped away from them, far, far away, through a small door to a place where she could hide and no one could find her. She slipped onto a roller coaster car and rode it, swooping up and down away from the eyes. Far, far, far up, slowly, slowly, then a rush and a running ride and a whooshing down, down, down into Carnival Land she went. And when her mother came calling her name, "Carney," she'd gone far, far away, into the lilting boxes of the Ferris wheel, up and around and high, staying high at the apex, slower, then faster, and slower. Looking down, she could see her mother, her beautiful mother, far below. She could see her mother's tears well and drop, and become frozen crystals, 2 large cubes of ice, catching shafts of light, shards of hard brilliance, sparkling, glittering, and then exploding in fireworks. Pshaw! Pshaw! Nurse always crept quietly in the shadows of the hush-closed room, casting down her eyes. She held the girl until the carnival music had quieted and the vendor stopped calling, this away, get your ticket here." Nurse held her until the carnival girl stopped hiding in the noisy clamor that was her own mind. Her father came once, and his look of concern sent the child farther into Carnival Land than she had ever been. He paced outside her door. The servants whispered and held starched aprons to their face. They could all hear the child screaming in terror as she swooped high up on the roller coaster and rushed down, only to climb slowly up again and again. The Ferris wheel going round and round, the roller coaster going up and down and around, the carousel going round and around, and the organ music grinding boom ba da boom ba da boom ba da boom ba da da. Everyone missed the lovely little girl who had danced and laughed and loved. Everyone was glad when she had quiet days and seemed more like her old self. And everyone dreaded the moments when a thoughtless look or even an imagined glance would send the child on the carnival rides that went on and never closed down and never moved to the next town. "Don't look! Don't look at me!" Carney would scream when no one was even in the room, and when all the drapes were tightly closed, and when nurse would rush to check. She knew by the faraway look on the child's face that the music had begun again, and that from the distant height of the inward Ferris wheel she herself was only a tiny speck on the ground, and her own cry, "Come back! Don't go away!" would scarcely be heard. For 5 years Carney went away in her mind, afraid that he would come and sear her again with a glance. Any looks of love, or only of casual interest, reminded her of that night when he captured her with his burning eyes. "Don't look! Don't look!" she would cry and go away. Each time she returned, she was thinner, more worn, as though the journey was too difficult for a child to make by herself. All who loved her suffered, but most of all her father, who mourned deeply his exile from his own daughter in his own house. One midday she was wakened by her mother's whisper, "Can you help her?" Carney kept her eyes closed. Not another doctor. They were all enchanter's men who sent her far away. If she just didn't look, if she just didn't remember. A man's voice answered quietly, "Yes, I can help her." Not another, she thought. Fear knotted its fist in her chest. She moaned, and she began scrambling toward the keyhole entrance in her mind to escape. "She's awake," said her mother. "She's going. Carney, don't go. Don't go. Someone's here who can help you." In a hurry, Carney found the little door that opened from here to there. But before she slipped through, she heard the man say, "Don't worry. I'll go with her." Then the carnival music hid the sounds. Fireworks exploded. Pshaw! Pshaw! Carney barkers announced, "Peanuts, popcorn, cotton candy." The merry-go-round, thought Carney. No one can find me. The merry-go-round goes round and round, and the painted horses go up and down. I can run and hide and stay there forever and ever. Pshaw! Round and up and round and down. "Peanuts, popcorn, get your ticket here." Round and round, up and down. Pshaw! The farther she rode, the more Carney thought she heard someone calling her name. She rode and rode on the painted pony until she was out of breath. It was a man's voice. If only she could drown it out in the carnival music. Boom pa da, boom pa da, boom pa da da. But still she heard him calling, "Carney, Carney." The enchanter. She knew what his evil eye had spoken when she was just a little girl, sucking her thumbs, cuddled in warm pajamas. "You are mine, all mine." She had always known that one day, when she was grown, the fire wizard would come to get her. With one look he would capture her eyes, and she would be helpless but to follow. This time she would stay here in Carnival Land and ride the carousel round and round and up and down forever and ever. Carney, Carney. With a sigh, Carney finally gave up. She dismounted the painted pony she had been riding. It was no use. He was here, the enchanter. She might as well look into his hot eyes. How could she resist one who could follow her through the secret keyhole into this boom-pa-da madness, round and up and down and round and up and down. With a sob, the girl looked toward the place from which his call had come. Yes, a man was standing in the middle of the carousel, under the arch of the turning roof. She could go round and round forever, but he would always be in the center of her turning. Carney, he called again. Don't be afraid. Carney lifted her eyes to see not the enchanter, but a most beautiful young man. She cast her eyes down again quickly. Carney, look up. Something in the young man's tone banished her fear. She lifted her eyes and for the first time in years looked full into a face. The wound within, which ached and throbbed with pain, began to ease. He reached his hand to her, and in a moment, in wonder, she lifted hers across the painted ponies to him. At his touch, the merry-go-round music began to slow. The blasting of the fireworks began to stop. The carnival music grew silent. Boom, pa, da, pa, da, pa. She was in her room when she came to herself, with her mother's shocked face close by. Nurse suddenly drew the draperies open, lifted the blinds, and threw apart the shutters. Light, glorious light, flooded the place that was once dark. She was still in her bed. The eiderdown was rumpled and moist with sweat. She was still holding the young man's hand. She was still looking into his eyes, but he was smiling the gentlest of smiles, and his look was full of love that could capture you, but only if you wanted it to. Oh, Mother, she sighed, I've been so far away. Her mother was crying now, but her tears were ordinary tears that glistened on her cheeks and fell onto the pillow where Carney's head rested. And then she remembered it had been years. Where's my father? She asked. It's been so long since I've seen my father. Carney's mother looked up at the young man, questioning. He nodded his head, and Nurse rushed from the room to wake Carney's father from his fitful sleep. How can we ever thank you? Asked Carney's mother. Carney thought she was so beautiful with her eyes moist and shining. The young man bent again and kissed the palm of Carney's hand, which he then placed beneath the coverlet. Become a part of the resistance that's working for the restoration of my kingdom, he answered. Throw all your resources into it, but only if you think it's a cause worth living and dying for. At that moment, Carney's father rushed into the room. He knelt by her bed and looked into her eyes, and the two of them embraced each other and began to weep aloud. Through her tears she could see the young man shaking her mother's hand and accepting Nurse's grateful hug. And then the man moved through the doorway, where the bevy of sleepy but curious servants were crowding and peering into her room. Don't go away, she thought. I want to look into your eyes one more time. But she remained silent, because she knew that one who could enter into the middle of madness in order to lead her safely out would always be at the center of her life, no matter how far she journeyed. She knew she would never again be out of the loving circle of his gaze.